in London, you could get shanked in the heart, still the government put more tax in Iraq. Ignorant little spitters are talking greasy, cause they bitten bits that they saw on TV. If all you rap about is the holes in the dope, it's already too late. You sold them, you sold. You jokers act like you know but you don't, cause there's little kids dying all over the globe.
It's important that we support Syria, and I think there are several reasons. When our ruling class goes on the offensive against another country and another people, it is our absolute duty to stand with that country and with that people, irrespective of what we think about their politics or their policies in this or that area, irrespective of what we think about the character of their government. Because that we know that for us as partisans of the working class movement, as the slogan goes, the main enemy is at home. And if our ruling class takes a stand against another people, it is our duty to stand side by side with them. And because our ruling class gains its strength from the ability to suck the blood, the wealth, the resources, not only of the working class at home, but even more importantly, of hundreds of millions of oppressed people throughout the world. So we stand with anybody who fights against our imperialist ruling class, both on the standpoint of natural justice, that we want to see the victory of that people. We, as decent people, want other people to have the right to forge their own destiny and have a decent life, but also because if we are to establish a better future for our children and our grandchildren, as we see that the situation in this country becomes worse and worse in every field of life, be it in employment, in health service, in living standards and so on. If we are to make a better future for our people, we have to support anything that cuts off the oxygen supply to our ruling class, and we have to stand side by side with the people who are fighting against our enemy, against our main enemy, and who frankly are doing a much better job of it than we have done for the last 100 years. So that I think is one important reason why we have to stand with the Syrian people. These reasons are not mutually exclusive. They're interconnected. They're, if you like, almost different ways of saying more or less the same thing. But I'll continue. The second reason is that the fight that is going on in Syria today is, yes, it is a fight for the future of Syria, for the rights and freedoms of the Syrian people, and I'll say a little bit more about that at the moment. But it's not only a fight for the Syrian people, it's a fight for every single people in the world. It is just both, if you like, the misfortune and the honour of the Syrian people that at this moment in time they are the ones who are standing in the front line and making the greatest, most immediate sacrifices. But the fight that is being waged in Damascus or Aleppo or Latakia is a fight for people all over the world. And just to illustrate that point, on Tuesday of this week was the 81st anniversary of an incident that took place in northeast China. An incident where the Japanese created an incident that didn't in fact take place. They created an incident to say that a Japanese garrison in northeast China, which shouldn't have been there in the first place, but it was attacked. And this attack 81 years ago on Tuesday was used as a pretext for Japan to begin its war in China. A war that led at that time to the creation of a puppet Japanese state in the 3 northeastern provinces of China. 6 years later, Japan began an all-out war against the whole of China. From that incident in 1931, a number of things followed in fairly rapid succession. Italy invaded Albania and Ethiopia. A war broke out in Spain, where a progressive government had come to power. A fascist rebellion took place in Spain, and the fascist powers, Germany and Italy, intervened on the side of the Spanish fascist forces, and you had the conflict in Spain. All of these things were preparatory to, were in fact the opening shots of a world conflagration that broke out. And that is why at that time the international communist movement took the stance, particularly with regard to China and with regard to Spain, that what was happening there was not only the concern of those peoples, but was the concern of people all over the world. And the Spanish communist leader, Dolores Ibárruri, known as La Pasionaria, said at the time that by fighting to stop the bombs falling on Madrid and Barcelona, people were fighting to stop the dropping of bombs in London or in Paris. And these words proved very prophetic. And what has happened over the last years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, in Yugoslavia, in Libya, and above all, and even more so in Syria today, is that the war that's been waged against the Syrian people, and we talk about opposing the threat of imperialist intervention in Syria, and that's correct, but imperialism is already intervening in Syria. There is already a war in Syria. There has been a war in Syria for some time. It is not, in my view, a civil war. That's not to say that there are not some Syrian people fighting on both sides, but there is a war being waged by the main imperialist powers through, in particular, but through their proxies in the region, through the Turkeys and the Saudi Arabias and the Qatars, against the Syrian people. That war is a war against the Syrian people first and foremost, and most immediately. It is also a war against Iran, and it's also a war against Russia and China. And the reason why, the fundamental reason why Russia and China have really fundamentally drawn a line on this issue is, in my view, because they have at last realized that the flames of war are starting to lick very close to their front doors. And if Syria falls, which I hope it won't, and I think there's every chance that it won't fall, but if Syria falls, then war on Iran, it will probably follow very shortly thereafter. And after that, imperialism will, to have a great extent, cleared all the obstacles in its way to a confrontation with Russia and China. And therefore, it's important that we stand with Syria, both because we must stand with any force that fights against our ruling class. We must stand with Syria for the democratic right of the Syrian people and the Syrian nation to self-determination, and we have to stand in support of Syria in defence of Iran, of Russia and China, and indeed for the peace of the whole world, and to stop what is a clearly thought out and clearly articulated imperialist attempt to re-establish its global hegemony, and to undo the gains of the various working class revolutions of the 20th century and of the anti-colonial movement that followed in its wake. And finally, although this is taking a step back, I'd like to say, although we must support every movement which is geared against our ruling class, irrespective of the social composition or the nature of the leadership of that movement, but it's important to also say that the Syrian government is a progressive government. If it wasn't a progressive government, it would still be correct to support it. But it is a progressive government. It is a government which has delivered a better life for its people and has supported the people throughout the region. It is a government which took the majority of the economy into state hands, which carried out land reform, which promotes education and science and culture. It's a government where women have equal rights with men. It's a government development where health and education are provided by the state, where the price of basic foodstuffs is subsidised, where you can be a Sunni or a Shia or an Alawite or a Christian of any different number of groups, Syrian Orthodox and others, where you can be Armenian or Arab,
Jew,
or Jew, and you can live, you can live in your home and go about your business, and that is a rare thing in the region. It wasn't such a rare thing a few decades ago. I mean, when I became interested in politics, you had a situation where really the dominant political forces in the Arab world were, if you like, were communism, Nasserism and Baathism. And these three forces had a complex relationship with each other. Sometimes they were in alignment, sometimes they were in contention, and of course each wished to push their strength at the expense of the other to some extent. But there was a contention for leadership of the Arab Revolution among whatever their differences were, among forces that were secular and modernising and progressive. And this is what has been progressively rolled back with the changes in Egypt following the death of Nasser, with the war against Iraq, with the war against Libya, and to the extent that, to a great extent, Syria is really the last bastion of progressive Arabism that is still standing. Syria represents, at this moment, everything that is progressive about the desires of the Arab people and the Middle Eastern people for a decent and a better life. And therefore, it's really incumbent upon us to take a very solid stand, without any equivocation whatsoever, in support of the Syrian people. If one looks at the Stop the War movement, they now talk about some intervention in Syria, and we must oppose more intervention in Syria. It took them over a year to come to this position. And we have to ask ourselves why. It is nothing short of disgraceful that the anti-war movement in this country could not see an attack against a secular, democratic, progressive Arab state and a warmongering campaign by imperialism directed not only at that country but against Iran, Russia and China, against the entire Middle East, and in support of Zionism and imperialism when it was staring them in the face. And therefore we have to do whatever we can with the small forces at our command to actually take these basic points, I think, into the anti-war movement and into the working class movement. I think we should be under no illusions that our efforts are really small compared to the truly heroic sacrifices and struggle that has been put up by the Syrian people. I was reading some articles from the New York Times published over the last 2 weeks this afternoon, and they were interviewing some so-called Syrian refugees in Jordan, some people actually from the Free Syrian Army, and they said, we thought this would all be over in a few weeks, and if we'd known that it would go on for so long, we wouldn't have bothered. You know, that really, the small country has stood against the combined might of imperialism and all its proxies in the region is nothing short of one of the most heroic pages in human history, alongside the struggles of the Korean people and the Vietnamese people. And we as modest as it is that we're able to do, we have a duty to extend every possible support and solidarity to that people, and to condemn all those who would pose as being against war, except for the war that is actually being waged against people like the heroic people of Syria.
were wrong to say you had nothing to say. But it's often the case when you disagree with me, that's okay.